Hey guys, welcome back to another Genshin Impact video, and I wanted to do something really quickly because today we had the version 6 special program, or Luna 1 as they call it, and there was something very interesting that they announced, which I'll be playing on screen for a little bit. Essentially what they're going to be doing is, in addition to Access Constellation 6's turning into a way for you to level up a character past level 90 and give them higher base stats, they're also making it so you can get 4 universal stella fortunas, which I'm going to try to skip to actually. One sec, let me find it. Now you can farm up to 4 universal stella fortunas that could be used for any character, or technically not universal, you have to choose which character you want, which is a feature that many people have been asking for ever since the game came out, especially with there being so many characters and with constellations being pretty hard to come by. I've also talked about this myself because I feel like this could be a way to continue increasing the value of older units to keep up with newer ones. If you can get, let's say, C3, C4 of an older character versus a C0 new character, that can still kind of give the older character a niche or a reason to be played. Now, just a quick overview as to how the system works. You're only allowed, to my knowledge, to get 1 constellation per character. So hypothetically, if you were to, say, get a constellation of, or Stella Fortuna of, let's say, Ayato and bring him from C0 to C1, you can't get another one for him for the future ones. So again, you're allowed to get 4 per year. I don't know how often they're going to be doing it, maybe like once every other version or so, I forget exactly the details to it, but you're only allowed to get it once. In this video, I wanted to make a kind of a quick guide video, not a super detailed one, but more like a tier list of like what characters should you go for in terms of constellations. For the purposes of this video, and to also account for the fact that most players, the vast majority of players in Genshin, do not have access to anything beyond C2, in the sense that if you do have access to C3, C4, C5, chances are you're not really that strapped for a free constellation, and you can probably get extra constellations of a character whenever you want. My guess is that you're a big spender. I don't think a free-to-play player will ever be able to consider getting C3 or higher. C1, C2 on the other hand is definitely within reasonable, I guess, attainability. A couple things to bear in mind though. Unfortunately, we don't have access to every single character for this, I guess, this first iteration. These are the only characters you have available at the moment. They're primarily consisting of the standard units, version 1, version 2, and then version 3. Even within them, however, you cannot get constellations for Archons, which is kind of a missed opportunity because I feel like Venti, Shogun, and Zhongli do need their constellations if they want to keep up with the current meta. But besides the point, I understand why they're very lore relevant characters, and so it'd be kind of pointless to, or not pointless, but it wouldn't be in Hoyo's best interest to make them, I guess, more commodified. In addition, you're also not allowed to get constellations for Kazuha, Yelan, and Alhaitham. My guess is because giving them constellations is kind of a no-brainer, right? If you were to leave them in the pool, then everyone will get constellations for Kazuha, Yelan, and Alhaitham. They're probably trying to focus on the units who could benefit from having them, but then, you know, not make the already strong units much stronger. Although I feel like Alhaitham is not quite in the same range or in the same, I guess, weight class as Kazuha and Yelan, but regardless, it's a pretty decent selection of characters, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of those units and then put in the list over here what constellations I think are worth getting. Now, once again, this is not a super detailed guide, it's just like a quick overview since I'm sure everyone's going to be asking which characters do you want to go for, and we're going to do that. Now, really quickly, I'm just going to move all the standard units into this spot right here. While you can get constellations for them, they are included in the pool, as you can see here. Because you can lose 50-50 to them, you can get them by losing 50-50. I really don't see a reason to want to go out of your way to get them. However, that being said, if you already have, let's say, one of them at C6, and none of the other characters presently interest you in getting a constellation for, and if you want to, let's say, try to get an existing character to level 100, then maybe you can consider getting them. But I'm guessing most free-to-play players, even if you're a day 1 player, don't have multiple copies or like a C6 5-star of the standard pool. So yeah, we'll just leave them over here. But again, maybe for Tignati, if you have C5 already, you could go for C6 because it's not that bad. Overall though, it's only if you want to get a character to level 95 or level 100 and things like that. First character we're going to be talking about is Klee. Klee, I'm going to put in C2's worth, C1 not really. So the thing with Klee is that her C1 is kind of not that great. It just gives him a bit more, it just gives her a bit more damage in Sparks and Splash whenever she attacks. It adds a bit more damage to Klee's attack rotation, but she's not really the best power DPS, not a bad one by any means. But the real thing that people might give a bit more consideration to is her C2. Defense breaking is super uncommon in Genshin, even to this day. In terms of like what is the highest amount, I believe Raiden C4 is the highest at 30%. Most other defense breaks are hovering anywhere between 15% around that ballpark. So 23% defense break by just using the skill is pretty damn good, because it does make Klee do quite a bit of damage, especially if you compound a bunch of other attack buffs on her, and it applies to the rest of the party, because if you're shredding a boss's defense, anyone else in your party who can do damage can benefit from it. Klee's not the highest priority character, but she certainly isn't a bad choice if you have her C1 already, and you're thinking about getting her C2. Next one's going to be Child. Child, I'm going to put in either neither C1 nor C2 are that great. For him, his C1 and C2 are mostly quality of life things. For example, decreasing the cooldown of Raging Tide allows you to cancel Raging Tide and get it back up more quickly and more efficiently and more consistently. But I feel like most people who are good at playing International don't really need this. Like, they're trying to destroy an entire boss or a chamber with one rotation of Foul Legacy. It's good to have if you really enjoy playing Child and you just want something a bit more consistent, or if you have to fight multiple waves of enemies and you do need to rotate twice. Outside of that, not really that important. Second goes for number 2. When opponents with Riptide are defeated, then he gets a bit more energy. Energy is, of course, important to consider, but Child isn't like that strapped for energy in my opinion. I feel like, especially if you pair him with, or if you're focused on killing a bunch of enemies, you're going to be regenerating energy a lot anyway. So I don't really think either of them are all that great, especially not for a Constellation, right? Because you also have to consider opportunity cost. If you want to spend one of your 4 free Constellations on him, then you don't get it for the other characters. So that's also one more thing to consider. Speaking of which, Albedo is pretty bad. He's a bad character, no offense to Albedo mains, if there are any. He's a pretty bad character and his Constellations don't really do anything to fix that. Not to mention, they just don't really do all that much. Maybe C2, but again, Albedo himself is just a bad character. He's just not really worth it. Ganyu is going to be, I would say C1 is worth, C2 not really. The main thing with her is that while I myself am a big fan of any kind of thing that lets me cast skill twice or thrice or quadrice or whatever, it's not really conducive to what Ganyu is trying to do. All getting an extra cast of Trail of the Chilling does is let you draw aggro more, get a bit more energy, especially for, getting particles and whatnot, but that's already sort of covered by her C1. She gets a bit more energy there. And Ganyu, especially if you're trying to play her for, let's say, like DPS, she's not super contingent on getting energy, particularly because most cryo units are paired with a bunch of other cryo units to supplement energy. That being said, C1's pretty good because you do get cryo shred, and it also is just a bit more consistent for Ganyu's gameplay. So C1's alright. It's not fantastic, but it could be something to consider if you're a Ganyu fan. Next one's going to be Shell. Shell is going to be probably neither C1 nor C2. Same principle as Ganyu, where one of his Constellations lets you cast a Lemniscatic Wind Cycling again, and I like that. I'm just a fan of it. But the purpose of this is mostly to just get more energy on him, right? Even though his skill can do a decent amount of damage, the bulk of his DPS does come from plunging attacks. And if you have a proper party built around him, then Shell doesn't really need to worry too much about getting a lot of energy. Same goes for number 2. C2 is also an energy recharge thing, but again, you can supplement that without having to get a Constellation, like if you just have a good build. You have to mold a bit more with artifacts and whatnot, and you also do need to have the right teammates for it, but if you had to choose between a teammate and a Constellation, teammate's always more up your alley. I don't think it's really that necessary. Hu Tao is going to be C1. C1 is definitely a very important breakpoint or threshold for her to cross because it allows you to essentially access a new playstyle for Hu Tao that ever since version 1.2 when she came out has been super important. Was it 1.2 or 1.3? No, it was 1.3 because Shell and Ganyu came out in 1.2. But anyways, Hu Tao is definitely very dependent on C1. Like when people say what's a C1 that a character definitely needs, it would be Hu Tao. She's like the prime example of that. C2 on the other hand, not necessary, really. It's a bit more damage, but it's not really worth getting a C2 for. I don't think it's that important. C1 is a good place to stop at, so if you already have C1 Hu Tao, then you need not go any further. Okay, Eula, I'm gonna put in maybe C1 is worth, C2 not really. I might even put her here. Eula's in a tough spot because in a similar fashion to, let's say, Albedo, she's not as bad as Albedo, but in a similar fashion to him, she's just not a supported niche right now. That being said, Tidal Illusion is not bad. It is 30% physical damage bonus that you can essentially have for your entire rotation. Is it really something that like you want to go out of your way for? Possibly, if you have Constellations or other characters already set. C2 is not that important. In fact, I would say it's pretty bad. So C1 would be better. It's like a hard maybe, by the way. Like I don't think it's like in terms of opportunity cost, I don't think it's as important as like C1 Hutao or, you know, not even C1 Ganyu, but you get the idea. It's really tough. A lot of the version 1 characters, if you look at it in a vacuum, then their constellations are pretty good. But if you look at it in relativity to other characters, not so much. Anyways, moving on, unfortunately Kosuha does not get included in this pool, so we'll have Ayaka next. Ayaka is going to be C2 worth, C1 not really. You might be a little confused as to why I say one constellation is worth while the other one isn't, especially if it's C2, considering you need C1 to get access to C2. The point of this category is essentially if you already have C1 on a character, then you can consider going for their C2. But if say Ayako is at C0, then you should not use your free constellation on her unless of course you can find a way to get the extra one, because C2 is Ayaka's like, you know, the creme de la creme of constellations for her. This is just a flat, humongous increase to her burst damage and is part of the reason why people like to speedrun with her in Spiral Abyss. However, if that's like assuming you can get there, this on its own, her C1 is not super consequential for her gameplay, and so if you have let's say C0 Ayaka, I don't think you really should be going for C1. If you have C1 Ayaka though, definitely go for C2. It is critical to her endgame meta relevance. Okay, Yoimiya, I'm gonna put in probably here as well. She has a similar kind of thing as Eula, where one of her constellations is super like meh, and then the other one is definitely usable. But when you consider the kind of quality of character that is Yoimiya, it doesn't look all that impressive. So first of all, C1 is practically non-existent, right? Because you do get 20% bonus attack, but like come on, like you can get that off an artifact set. Same goes for here. When you get a critical strike, you can get 25% pyro damage bonus. Most characters, if they're DPS built, can get this passive off non-stop, right? Like Yoimiya is always going to be able to have this. And she can even get it when she's not the active character. So it's definitely a present thing, but the number's just not that big. If we're talking like 40-50%, then yeah, that definitely matters. But at 25%, it's just to burn an entire constellation for, again, you only get 4 every single year, or maybe just this year alone, or this version rather. To spend that on Yoimiya C2, it is above for her. It's just you can find so many better candidates for a free constellation. Next is going to be Kokomi. Kokomi is going to be, I would say, maybe C1 is worth, C2 not really. So Kokomi is, she definitely hasn't been doing super hot in recent times because healers are expected to do a lot more nowadays. That being said, she does have usability as a main attacker, and C1 is conducive to that. Because you can, let's say, play her in a Nilou Bloom team, and if you do manage to get Nilou to level 100, then the Bountiful Blooms will be doing so much more damage, and then getting C1 Kokomi can make a Nilou Bloom team extremely strong. C2 is not really that necessary, it's pretty bad. I would say even C1 though, it's not like a super important thing. You could still play her at C0 and do perfectly fine. But if you have no one else to go for, then C1 Kokomi is not the worst thing in the world. Ito is going to be in maybe C2. I'm a bit conflicted. So first, C1 is, it's a quality of life update, or it's a quality of life upgrade for Ito. He can function perfectly fine without it, and it really wouldn't impact his rotation or performance all that much. But for people who do want to have more consistency in his kit, then they can definitely go for C1. C2 is pretty good though, because you can get skill cooldown decrease, and that does play into Ito's rotation and optimization. You can get more energy, and you can get faster skill activation. That actually could work. It's not like, again, that important. You can still play C0 Ito and do perfectly fine. But if you do have C1 Ito, and if you've played him before and you just want to give him a touch-up, it would not necessarily be a bad decision to go for it. Next character is going to be Shunhe. Alright, Shunhe might be my first character to go in C1 and C2 good/worth. That's not to say that she's a better character than any of the ones below her, but if you look at her constellations, they are pretty productive upgrades to her kit. So let's take a look at the first one. Spring Spirit Summoning, which is her skill, can be used one more time. This actually matters for her because you can get more empowered attacks, because how it works is that after you use her skill, X amount of attacks afterwards get empowered to do more damage based on her attack. So it's like a flat increase essentially. Being able to get a new supply of X empowered attacks is certainly helpful, especially if you're running a Nod-Krai team, which Shunhe has to be played into. So that's good for her as well. You can function perfectly fine at C0, but this does add a non-negligible increase to her DPS. C2 especially is really good though, because you get a longer duration of her elemental burst, and you can also get increased cryo damage. You can also get increased cryo damage while you're inside that burst. As you know, her elemental burst decreases cryo res of enemies on field, and it also deals damage of its own. So if you take that and compound it with C2, it's a pretty good upgrade. So I would say both Constellations are pretty good for Shunhe. Now, you know, you could debate, because she's a hyper niche character, you don't get as much benefit out of it, but again, they disqualified all the universal support characters like Kosuha and Yelan. Well, not support, but you get what I mean. The universal characters who could benefit on multiple different teams and stuff like that. They disqualified most of them, so they're mostly targeting the niche characters or like the DPS characters, and I would say Shunhe is not bad, especially now that we have Escoffier and now that Freeze and Nod-Krai teams are back in business. There is a good reason to go for her. I already have her at C2, so I don't know if I will go any further, but you know. Next character is going to be Yaemiko. Yaemiko is going to be in probably C2. So Yaemiko, her C1, and I talked about this before I think in my, I don't know if it was my Why No One Plays episode of her or my What Happened to episode. This really should just be in her base kit. I don't know why it's not. I think it's just such an unnecessary thing to put into Constellation and it could be something else. But her C2 on the other hand does help. Getting an extra level on her totem to get, add a new threshold and increasing their attack range can make Yaemiko's personal DPS quite significant. Not like super great, but it's overall a very big upgrade for her and can allow her to contribute quite a bit of damage. If you have C1 Yaemiko, I would highly recommend considering her C2. Ayato. Ayato, I'm gonna say, is maybe C2. Kind of a difficult one. Reason being, Ayato C1 it's alright. I mean, it does give him more damage if enemies are below half HP, but I really wish there was a different condition for this, as opposed to just being like, oh, you have to wait until they get below half HP before you start doing some decent damage. C2 on the other hand is worth consideration because he gets 50% bonus max health. Just one caveat though, Ayato's base damage is just not that great. And his HP scaling is also not that great either. So his personal damage, that's not what Ayato is known for. He's known for application and consistency. His two constellations, C1 and C2, are isolated from everything else, pretty big upgrades. Like I think other characters would very much appreciate having a 50% attack boost, or a 50% damage boost, or 40% increased damage. But Ayato specifically just doesn't have very high base numbers, and so it doesn't look as good on him. However, if you do get him to C2, again, it's not the worst option to go for. I think it could definitely be something to think about, especially if you enjoy using Ayato. Okay, Cyno. Cyno's going to be probably another C2 character. C1 gives him bonus attack speed, which is not, it plays into his playstyle, but I think overall it doesn't give him enough juice to justify spending an entire constellation for. C2 on the other hand is not bad, it's pretty good actually. This one gives you up to 50% bonus electro damage on his normal attacks, or no, not normal attacks, just in general. He can get up to 50% bonus electro damage. Now we're talking, as I mentioned in the Yoimiya section, she only gets 25% power damage, but Cyno gets 50% electro damage bonus. That's a pretty solid amount to go for. So if you have C1 already, then you can go for C2. If you have C0 Cyno, then maybe you can try going for C1. Probably better if you already have C1 Cyno to go for C2. Or I guess you can get a free C1 Cyno and then try to spend to go for the C2. Either way, Cyno is just a tough character to properly gauge. He's not a terrible character by any means, it's just that he's definitely a pretty unfortunate one to go through. That being said, if you do want to go for C2 Cyno, there's no reason you shouldn't. Like, I wouldn't say don't do it. It's not a bad choice to go for. Nilou. Nilou I'm going to put maybe in C1 and C2. Okay. So as we know, Nilou is going to be buffed a lot with the introduction of level 100 because as you know, elemental reactions are based on level. So increasing from level 90 to 100 will make her specifically really strong. Adding C1 and C2 on top of that might be something you want to take into account for. C1 is not the best. Getting extra aura extension is pretty good. I don't think it's necessary for what Nilou's trying to do and how she wants to do it. However, C2 is fantastic. because you get Hydro Res and Dendro Res reduction by 35%. All you have to do is trigger a Bloom reaction and or deal Hydro damage. Now, one more thing to consider is that Nilou cannot run a Virtus and Venerer character because you cannot have an Anemo character on your team. And if I'm not mistaken, there's no other way to universally shred Hydro and Dendro resistance on enemies. So C2 changes a lot for Nilou. In fact, I might say it's the strongest constellation of the group, like out of all these characters, with the main exception probably being C1 Utal. C2 Nilou objectively has to be the strongest in my opinion. It gives her so much more power into her gameplay, more than any other character C1 and C2. Oh, actually no, Ayaka is up there as well. So like Nilou, Utal, and Ayaka, they have pretty strong C1/C2. In the case of Nilou, I would say this is something you definitely want to consider if you have. In the case of Nilou, if you have C1 Nilou, one of the 4 free constellations should absolutely be this one. And then we are at Wander. Wander is going to be, I think I might also put him up here as well. Both of Wander's constellations are decent. They're pretty decent. So the first one gives him higher attack speed, and it also gives him bonus damage on his passive talent. So it's a little bit more significant than just a simple flat attack speed buff. C2 on the other hand does add a pretty significant increase to his elemental burst damage. You can get up to 200%, which matters quite a bit. So I would say both of these constellations do a good job in increasing his DPS, and Wander himself is a very vertical investing character, so naturally constellations can play into that. I would say of the two, C2 is definitely better. Not to say if you have C0 Wander you can't go for C1, but it would be more like erring on this. That being said, C1 still carries merit. Both of these are quite decent. Alright, that brings us to our last available character, which is Baizhu. Baizhu is going to be, I think, a C2 character. Now, it's a bit tricky for him because I'm gonna say right now C1 is not that great. It is another one of those you can cast it again, which in the case of Baizhu could be helpful because you get more elemental energy, and you can also get more healing. You know, it's a quality of life sequence. Or not sequence, my bad. I always confuse Constellation, Idol, and sequences, but it's a quality of life constellation, and it's not the worst thing to go for, but I don't think it is within the realm of being worthwhile to spend one of your 4 on. Number 2, on the other hand, can be or cannot be, depending on how you look at it. How it works is that it allows Baizhu to do increased damage, or not increased damage, it allows Baizhu to do damage on the side and also get more healing as well. Quick thing, in that Baiju's a healer. He's a healer who could do damage, mind you, but he's mostly a healer, so I don't know how important something like this can be. It's hard to rank, right? Because it depends on what you prioritize. Like, it's a good constellation to have, especially given that it triggers from being off-field, in the sense like Baizhu does not have to be on-field to take advantage of this constellation. So it's a net increase no matter how you look at it. Any amount of damage and extra healing is better than none. But it's a healer. Healers don't really do damage unless your name is like, what was the character that can heal while do damage? I guess maybe Bennett by proxy of his attack boost, but you get what I mean. Kind of hard to evaluate. It's one of those things where if you have no one else you really care about, then yes, you can go for it. But I would probably just put it a tentative C2 is worth. Yeah, more or less. Alright, so that should be the entire list. Now, again, this is a very cursory overview. It's not like super calculated or run down or anything like that, but I don't think this list is too inaccurate. You're always welcome to disagree if you like to. I do think that adding this feature overall, just the ability for people to farm constellations, is pretty good because, like I said, some of these characters have definitely been failing to stand the test of time, but if they were to get an additional constellation here and there, that could push them up a little bit so that they can keep up with the increase in power creep. Funnily enough, I feel like the characters that could use it the most, or the characters that would be more interesting to give free constellations for, are version 4 and possibly version 5 characters. Now granted, that makes no sense to give version 4 and version 5 characters because the point is to make 1, 2, and 3 characters able to keep up with 4 and 5. But I think later in the future, if they do decide to allow, let's say, Novelette or Navia or Arlecchino to be added into discussion, then yes, they can actually get much more benefit out of their C1 and C2 than any of these characters. Most of the earlier version C1 and C2s are not that great, with the exception again of a very select few like Hutal, Ayaka, and Nilou and things like that, but the ones after can significantly increase the character's performance. So maybe in the future, if they decide to do this multiple times in, let's say, version 7, version 8, then I can come back and update this tier list, but for the time being, this is all we have. If you guys enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars and join my Discord server, and stay tuned for upcoming version 6 content on my channel in the future. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.